Hello, welcome to our first show of Off the Page, Swansea's new spoken word and poetry showcase. I'm really looking forward to introducing you to some fantastic guests today. We have Rae Howells, who is a poet and a lavender farmer who has written a book called The Language of Bees. We have Matthew M.C. Smith, who is a poet, an editor of Black Bough magazine, and a campaigner to bring the bones of the Red Lady of Paviland back to Swansea. We have Dr. Mikey Bryant, who is an amazing doctor who works between Swansea and Liberia, and he'll be sharing some of his poetry about his experiences. Hello and welcome to Off the Page, our new TV show, which is going to be showcasing some of the best spoken word and poetry in Swansea and the area. I'm really excited to introduce our first guests for our first ever show. We've got some amazing people that I know you're going to love. The first is Rae Howells. She's published her debut collection, The Language of Bees, which has been shortlisted for the Wales Poetry Book of the Year. She's previously won the Rialto and Welsh poetry competitions and been featured in many journals. And in addition to being a poet and a journalist, she's also a lavender farmer. And her book, The Language of Bees, focuses on bees and is related to that. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Our second poet is Matthew M.C. Smith. Matthew's someone I really admire, both for his poetry and also his encouragement of other poets. He runs the Black Bough Poetry Journal, which is an amazing showcase of poets from all over the world, I think, isn't it? Yeah. And focuses particularly on imagist poetry. Yeah. So I will be interested to hear more about that. He's also involved with campaigning to bring the bones of the Red Lady of Paviland back to Swansea. Yeah. So I hope you'll tell us more about that shortly. And as if that's not enough, our third poet is Dr. Mikey Bryant, known to me as Mikey B. He's one of our regulars at the Talisman Spoken Word. Amazing, inspiring person, a poet, a very good runner. And he also does amazing work out in Africa, in Sierra Leone, where he, as a doctor, has been involved in setting up medical facilities there. So I hope you're going to tell us more about that. It sounds amazing. So I'd like to start with Rachel, if that's okay.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for coming.
My pleasure, thanks for inviting me.
It's so great to see you again. I think last time I saw you, we were at the Dylan Thomas Theatre, weren't we?
Oh, that's right, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, back in January.
So, so it's great to catch up with you. So tell us a little bit more about your book, and I'm interested to know sort of how you got into lavender farming, because that's quite different from being a journalist. So tell me how it came about.
Partly that's why, because it was so different from being a journalist. So I'll tell you about the lavender farming, because I think the bee book really came out of that. So I was a journalist and I ran a newspaper over in Port Talbot for several years, and was trying to solve the problem of the democratic deficit when you lose a local newspaper. How do you make sure that people get their voices heard and get the information they need, and that the people in power are scrutinised? So we kind of had this project. It was a hyper-local newspaper in Port Talbot, and I ran that, and then the steel crisis hit, and I decided that really it wasn't feasible to run it anymore. Financially, it was a really difficult thing to do. And also when you're a journalist, you tend to hear, although you do hear lots of inspiring stories, you also hear lots of really desperately sad stories, and you tend to meet people at the worst moments in their lives. And so I thought, I've got to do something else. I need to stop doing this. It's making me miserable. So I kind of had classic burnout and decided I would go and do something completely different. And I decided that I really love lavender, and I wanted to get back to nature and writing and all of that stuff that makes me happy. So I found a corner of a field on Gower that a farmer very kindly allowed me to grow some lavender in, and then that's where it all started. So I now grow lavender in a different place in Merton on Gower, and we make it into soaps and pillow sprays and hand creams and all sorts of stuff. But really it's a joy to be in the field, and particularly now it's July when we're filming this, so to be out in that field and be surrounded by beautiful pollinators, and not just bees. The bees are kind of the stars of the show, aren't they? You can't miss them because they're so massive and bumbly and noisy. But there are moths and butterflies and grasshoppers and beetles and spiders and all sorts of other things. And when you are down in the roots and weeding the lavender and tending it, it makes you stop, it makes you go slow, it makes you pay attention to those things that I think in our normal everyday lives we're so busy and stressed out that we miss those little things.
Yeah, I suppose it crosses over into poetry, doesn't it? Because it's like a form of mindfulness, and when you focus on the small things, then that makes you want to write about them.
Absolutely, it's a meditation almost. You know, you're kind of in that field and you're listening and you're breathing in the smells and you're touching the earth, and I think all of that hopefully comes through in the poetry. But you know, I've been it's a climate collection, I think, this as well, and you can't help but worry when you are so close to nature and tending your crop. You can't help but worry about where the water's coming from and how much sun it's got, and all of that stuff becomes very urgent and immediate to you. So I think, you know, kind of paying attention to climate change. And also as a mum, I'm a mum of 2 daughters. I've gone through pregnancy loss. So some of that grief for the climate I've experienced similar for, you know, I'm kind of grieving for my children's future. I'm grieving for the children that I lost. So a lot of that has come through in this poetry as well, I think.
I was going to ask you about eco-poetry as a thing. I mean, do you think that poetry has a role as maybe, I know they're not really activist poems, but as a sort of form of activism, as a way of making people think about those sorts of issues?
I hope so, because I think there's a few things that are tied up in it. One is that it should be poetry of record, because the world is changing so rapidly now that it's really important that we as writers pay attention to that and record it, and record this change as it's happening. But I think that idea of making people pay attention to the little things, I think that's so important, because once you have that familiarity with a species, you know, I only know about bees because I decided to pay attention and learn about them, and through poetry and research and writing about them, you gain this huge relationship and this connection with what you're writing about. So I hope that people who read the book gain some of that, at least. It'll rub off like pollen on them, and that they'll care more, and that they'll think more about the way they mow their lawn or plant their garden or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to take something like bees for granted, isn't it? And yet they play such a massive role in ecology.
Massively important. You know, we rely on most of our food crops rely on being pollinated by bees and other pollinators too, but bees play a hugely important role. And not just honeybees. You know, we all think about honey and honeybees, but bumblebees are our native wild bees, and they need just as much help as honeybees do.
So tell me a little bit about the sort of process of poetry. Where do you get your ideas from, or what are you trying to... How do you kind of paint pictures with your poetry, if you like?
Oh. It's really hard to put into words, isn't it? And as someone who spends a lot of time putting things into words, it's weird that that's so difficult. Yeah. And I think poems come from different places. So sometimes you'll be out in nature and you'll see 2 things that don't necessarily fit together, and that will spark an idea, and then off you go. Or sometimes you just want to get a feeling out, or write, or have a muse about something. And I also go to a regular poetry group, and I think that's just as helpful for giving you and sending you off in different directions, for, you know, giving you a poetry prompt and sending you away. So I do that every month as well.
Yeah,
I think it's important.
Absolutely. I think it can be so inspiring just being around other creative people as well, not just poetry, but around artists or just creative people. Just kind of, it's like a magic, isn't it? You know, you just sort of inspire one another.
Definitely.
Can you tell me a little bit about your title poem?
Yes, so it's set in the lavender field, actually. So where we first started growing our lavender, there was the farmer there had unearthed some Roman artefacts. So when I turned up one day, he said, "Do you want to come see my Roman coins?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." I'm always game for that. So he took me around, he gave me a tour, and he showed me all of these Roman remains and the coins that they'd found and stuff. And then I went up into the field, and I was just sitting in the lavender weeding it, and it just got me thinking. My husband is an archaeologist as well, so I'm always kind of interested in what's under the earth as well, and what that means for where we've come from. And I'm quite interested in the future and climate change and legacy and all of that stuff. So I was just sitting having a little think about that, and what would the Romans have thought about that field, and would they have grown lavender there, and would they have had these same insects and these same bees? And it sort of became a little prayer, really, I suppose, about where we've come from and where we're going.
Yeah.
And how important it is to learn the language of bees, how important it is to listen and meet those creatures where they are. I think, again, we're so busy in our lives that we don't necessarily pay attention to the way we've shaped our environment, and those creatures don't necessarily adapt very well to our environment and what suits us. So we've lost the ability to give them what they need. We need to listen to them and meet them where they are, because otherwise we'll all be doomed.
Yeah. I'd like to bring in Matthew at this point, because I know, I think there's a link in the way that you sort of cover the full scope of archaeology, all the way from kind of Roman times to now to the challenge of climate change. And I think in your books, Matthew, a lot of your stuff also covers kind of history, but not just history, but how it relates to us now. I can hear sort of, there's like echoes of ancestors kind of singing through your poetry. So do you want to tell me a little bit about that? You know, how you get your ideas, or how the concept for your book, the Keeper of Aeons, kind of came about.
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of the poetry that I write, coming back to what Rae said, is about the poetry of record. I think I've got this fear. I'm 45 now, and I've got this fear that because I'm so busy with work and parenting, that sometimes I'll walk through life, and I feel I feel that sometimes when I write poetry, it's about trying to capture that moment or those times, so that in 5 years, 10, 15, 20, hopefully, I'll be able to look back and not just have an impression of it, but to almost time travel back. So I tend to try to write in detail. I tend to try to write in, I would say, vivid, multi-sensory writing, so that I can recall back that place, that time, that moment, that person. So part of it is about recall.
I know you have a sort of passion for imagistic poetry, and I think that comes into that as well, because imagist poetry is basically like trying to capture almost like a photograph, just a tiny moment. So could you tell us a little bit more about that, and about Black Bough maybe as well?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, in terms of trying to write in this hyper vivid way, and this is something you obviously see in Rae's work as well, I feel that for me, I try to paint pictures, but I also try to paint feelings as well, and I try to paint things that I hear. And I feel that if you write in a vivid way, if you write in terms of the images first, if you foreground those first of all, you're not telling a reader what they should feel. And also you're creating something that hopefully can transport the reader or the listener out of their situation and take them to that place or that time. So some of what I write is about, I suppose, time travel or traveling to places. And I really try to, I think I really try to transport people. That's what I try to. I try to transport people out of the everyday, out of their particular circumstances. So I find that a form that is focused on the image first really, really helps with that over some other forms of poetry.
So I know you've been involved with the campaign to bring the Red Lady of Paviland back to Swansea. Can you explain for people who might not know what that means, what that is, and what your involvement has been?
Sure. So I've got this tendency to choose crazy campaigns and impossible challenges, and trying to get back the Welsh version of the Elgin marbles back to Swansea is a crazy campaign. In 1823, an Ice Age hunter was found in a cave. At first, the archaeologist who was called to Gower to basically explore this cave, Pavlan Cave, thought that it was either a witch or a Roman lady. What actually came to light was that it's the bones of this red lady are it's basically an Ice Age hunter, and it's 33,000 years old.
Wow.
And when you look at its burial, his burial, it's incredibly sacred. It's the oldest ceremonial burial that's been found in the west of Europe, and it actually dates from the upper Paleolithic times. When you look at the sacred burial, it's beautiful. There are decorative shells. The bones were covered in red dust. There are bone spears, etc., etc. in it. The archaeologist who found it took it straight to Oxford, and it's been there for 200 years. For me, this is an outstanding thing for South Wales. It's an outstanding thing for Wales, and I feel it should be here. I feel that it should be in its place. I don't think it should be in its Gower Cave, because obviously vandalism, etc., etc. But I do feel that there should be a brilliant Ice Age exhibition in Swansea. I formed a campaign group, and we have had progress, actually very, very, very quick progress, because what the council have agreed to do is, after the refurbishment of the museum, they will look at a loan. Now, some people will say, yeah, but that's only temporary. From a personal point of view and the campaign's point of view, this is one step in the right direction.
Absolutely. It would be amazing, wouldn't it? Can you imagine seeing something that's, what was it, 33,000 years old? Wow.
Yeah.
I always think, so at the moment in the museum, they've got like a replica of it, haven't they, I think? Yeah. But it would be, it means so much, doesn't it, seeing the real thing? Yeah.
But why should we have to have a replica?
Exactly, yes, I'm with you.
Really, isn't it?
It'd be great to get it back. Yeah. And you've written a poem about it as well, haven't you, and a collection? Yeah. What's the name of the collection?
So I've got a small chapbook, which is called Pavland, Ice and Fire, but I do also have some Pavland poems in this.
So your current book, The Key Prevails, has some poems about the Red Lady of Pavland as well. And where can people get hold of the book? Who's it published by?
Okay, so it's actually published by Broken Spine, which is a Southport publisher. People can also buy it in Cover to Cover bookshop.
Okay, excellent. In Mumbles. Fantastic. So Mikey, I'd like to bring you in if that's okay.
Great.
Now, I know that you are a doctor, based in Swansea some of the time, or mostly in Africa. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So I basically spend half the year roughly in Swansea, and the other half of the year I live in a country called Liberia, which is in West Africa. So I used to work in Sierra Leone, but we've transitioned really over to Liberia, been involved there for almost 5 years now. And I'm actually responsible for a child health project there. So a few years ago when we got there, one of the things in the hospital that we noticed was that the pediatric ward was really empty, and we knew there were lots of sick children in Liberia. And so one of my goals was actually establishing a health link between the health board in Swansea and the hospital in Liberia, and that actually provided a lot of support and funding to open a paediatric ward. And things have blown up really since then, to the point where we're up to actually 60 paediatric beds, and the hospital's called the Alba Hospital. It's up to 60 paediatric beds there, and about 2,500 children every month through the under 5 clinic, which is a huge kind of expansion on where we were. I mean, we've gone from about 30 to 40 admissions 5 years ago on the inpatient side to regularly 300 to 400.
Wow.
So it's become a bit of a runaway train, and a lot of different groups and organizations and various people have kind of jumped on and started helping out. So it's exciting to be part of it. It's exhausting. Yeah. We are basically treating some of the sickest children in the world, and it's very emotionally draining, because not every child survives, and children come really in extremis, and I'm stretched really well beyond what my kind of normal medical abilities would be, and you just sort of learn to adapt and learn to keep going really as best as you can. So that's the medical side of things. So I actually just got back a week and a half ago.
So does your poetry play a role in that? I mean, do you use it as maybe a form of therapy, a way of kind of getting all these feelings out? Because obviously when you're in your professional role, you just have to go with it, don't you? You can't really be drawn in emotionally.
That's it. I mean, when I'm there, I have to be very focused. I have to be very medical, and really trying to be the sort of team leader in the resuscitation situations. You have to kind of maintain this icy calm. And one of the ways of kind of dealing with that is to actually start writing poetry, and that's where probably about half of my material actually starts out, from really a grief point, where perhaps a child's died that maybe I feel could have been saved if they were in the UK, or if they were in a more developed health system. And just dealing with that, I think, level of moral injury is one of the hardest things, but being able to put that on paper, and that often is the start of the creative process, but often the first kind of go-rounds and bits of writing on that, there'll just be a lot of emotion, a lot of stream of consciousness, and it takes a lot of refining to actually turn that into something that would be something I'd be happy to present, or try to get into a magazine or a journal or something somewhere. So there's always that kind of flashpoint of inspiration, and then over weeks and months that'll gradually form into a poem, and there'll be a lot more artwork and image that'll come in around that. And just the kind of interaction of cultures. I mean, Liberian culture is completely different to Wales.
Yeah, it must be quite. How do you sort of handle, the culture shock and having to divide yourself between two countries? Because you've also got a family, haven't you? And it must be so hard.
Yes, I mean, it's different. So when I first started going out there, it was actually 2010, I went to Sierra Leone, and there was literally just me going, and then got married, and now we have a little boy who's 18 months old. And one of the challenges was he actually arrived early. So I was in Liberia, and my wife went into labour at 29 weeks, which was really scary.
And you're in another country. Oh my goodness.
So I get this panicked call, and I end up rushing back that night. And I remember being on the plane and waking up kind of, in Heathrow Airport, and realizing, well, what's going to happen? Is Finlay still going to be here? And a lot of poetry actually came out of dealing with that trauma and that uncertainty. But really, that has actually brought a lot of things into kind of just, it sharpened my vision a lot, because when you go through a health crisis yourself, or your family member does, you realize what it's like to be a mum or a dad in that situation. So we went back to Liberia again in June of last year, and we were there really for 8 months, and a lot of that time was spent kind of rebuilding the newborn care centre. A lot of that was around what we'd experienced with Finlay. So it's a huge challenge. The hardest part's actually coming back here, because jumping out of that world of constant crisis and high speed, high emotion, lots of sick children, just wall-to-wall chaos, and then coming back here and leaving it is extremely hard. I hate leaving it behind.
Yeah. Well, because you feel like you should be there.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
And you were working during the pandemic, weren't you? And also during Ebola, I think you were also out there during that.
I sort of caught...
How did you deal with that? Because that must have been really quite frightening.
Yeah, in some ways, yes, it was. I mean, I kind of caught bits of both the epidemic of Ebola and the pandemic. So the Ebola stuff, I was in Sierra Leone, but that was really towards the end of the epidemic. And my role was restarting a hospital that had shut down. So we had a few hairy moments where people would basically be outside the hospital and we would have to isolate parts of the street sometimes because they'd collapse bleeding and various things. And that was very challenging. But what was just amazing was the resilience of a lot of the Sierra Leoneans in actually wanting to restart the hospital. And really that's what carried us through. And then COVID-19 was very challenging because I was already in Liberia. And really as COVID hit, I kind of got rushed into this sort of role as the hospital chief medical officer, and I was running this PEDS program and then suddenly carrying the CMO role as well. And basically they said, well, you've got some experience of dealing with viral outbreaks, you're in charge now, all the best. And that was very, very stressful. And we had to, it was interesting, I'd often get on the phone to basically colleagues in Morrison saying, look guys, what are you doing? How are you organizing stuff? Any ideas here? And we actually ended up redesigning the whole hospital there as well to separate out the COVID patients from everyone else. But the sad thing was COVID-19 in Liberia really devastated the economy. And that actually meant when you've got people who are really living on the edge, I mean, most of the population are living on about £1.50 a day. And the slightest thing will just tip people right into poverty. So our malnutrition program went from about 50 to 60 admissions a month up to about 150 just in the space of 4 months. Wow. And then we ended up kind of becoming the biggest one in Liberia, which is a huge undertaking. So even from here, I'm spending a lot of time online and on Zoom and in all these meetings trying to sort of manage the huge number of people that are coming through. But I think it's a testament really to a lot of the Liberian staff I work with. People have stepped up. And so when I'm here, the program, it keeps running, the staff keep it going, and they do a phenomenal job. So it's an honor to work with them, really.
So do you have any of your poems you could share with us now?
Sure, I would love to do that. I mean, this is one of my newer ones. I actually had the chance to go over to America to a little festival called the Rockport Poetry Festival in Massachusetts. And I actually wrote this poem while I was over there, and I was still processing some of what had happened to some of the children in Liberia. So this is quite a simple one. It's called More. Hold on to your breath. Don't let it escape. Hold your water in the court of diarrhea under your bloodstream's gavel. Hold your gaze through my tears, dropping through to morning. Hold your days ahead. You can be, just be. But if you slip and bounce over my head tonight, if there are no more cuddles, no more twirling dresses, no more giggles, no more swirling messes, no, you are more than this week, more than a fever's slope, more than an icy chart skiing to a crash, more than your 2 years scrambling from faded lighthouses to stunted sirens, more than the wooden dance I'd mapped out. My daughter still, rise above me tonight. Show me you're more than I know.
Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think what this program has really brought home to me is how, although we all write very diverse poems, what power poetry has, actually, because you've illustrated the ability to use poetry almost as therapy, but also to open our eyes to a very different world, the sharp end of the medical world that I will, professionally will never be part of, hopefully personally will not. And it just opens your mind, doesn't it? And also the ability to kind of focus on small details and make you actually really appreciate the world. So thank you, all of you. I wondered, Rach, would you like to read a poem as well? It'd be great to hear one of them.
Shall we have a bee?
That'd be lovely.
Something. I read this one a lot just because I think bees are just full of joy, and I lived this while I was researching bees, and it's a joyful poem. what I learnt about bees when I was looking at them was that they can do this special technique where they sonicate themselves. It's called floral sonication. They vibrate at a particular pitch, and the flower will then release all of the pollen down onto them. And the pitch that they sonicate at is middle C, and I just thought that was very beautiful. So, sonication. I am more than you. I am a musical note. My body makes the colour of a middle C. Flowers clutch their pollen tight as pearls, but my thorax, abdomen, hind legs, forewings, mandibles, antennae, tongue, together transform, hum, and then I become a trembling, vibrating, perfect note, sonicating. My body is diva, and when I hit my note, they throw flowers, drench their pearls down my back.
Oh, that's amazing.
Just joyful. I love it. I love bees. They're magic.
I was, you know, it's funny. I was looking on YouTube yesterday about bees because of your book, and also because I find bees fascinating. I mean, I think everybody does. And there are videos you can listen to of bees humming, which, because apparently it's supposed to be like a healing frequency.
Oh, really?
And I sat and listened to bees humming, and it's very soothing. It's a little bit like rain. It's
They look impossible, don't they, as well, especially the big bumblebees. Their wings look too small for their bodies, but they just somehow they manage to fly along, and they do such an important job.
I've always been fascinated by sort of music and vibration, and I think poetry is, I mean, at its very, very root, it is a form of vibration, isn't it? It's noise, it's sound, but you can use that sound to convey so much, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's like painting with words, isn't it, really? I think poetry. And I think what Matt was saying earlier is that's almost what you're saying too. It's that finding that image that crystallises an emotion or a moment or something and transports the reader there.
Yeah.
So I think it's got a huge power.
I think every poet here, every person here is trying to do the same thing in radically different ways.
Yes.
And I think it's about sensitizing people because we're all so busy and as I said earlier, it's easy to sleepwalk through kind of stretches of your life, but through that sensitization process, we can obviously tap into other people's experiences, their feelings, and then things that we would never come into contact with, such as obviously, I mean, Mikey's poetry. I will never be in that kind of experience, and similarly, I will probably never own a lavender field. But it's great to have some idea, some sense of what that could be like.
Yes, it's a sense of shared humanity, isn't it? You know, it brings us together, and I found that through poetry, especially in lockdown when we were all shut in our own homes. But to me, it opened up a whole world of other poets, because I joined in all these online poetry groups, including the Rock Poet one that you mentioned, and made friends with poets all over the world who I will probably never meet face to face. I wish I could. But you realise that you just have this commonality, you know, at the end of the day. We're all human and we experience the same emotions, and we can relate that. It's magic, isn't it, really?
It is, and the vibration thing is really interesting, because even at Rockport there were poets there from all over the world, and a lot of them were reading in their mother tongues before reading in English, but you could get a sense of something of what the poem was about before they'd even moved into English, and I think it's to do with the tone and just the way things are said and facial expression, something about that performing which just connects on a way. So almost when it comes to the English translation, you have a sense of almost what's going to be said already, and that was extremely powerful, just connecting all over the world. And there were the poets there from Europe and Asia and everywhere, and that was a real privilege.
Yeah. So Matthew, you haven't read a poem yet. Could you finish us off with a poem, because that would be lovely.
Thank you. This is Pavland, Ice and Fire, and it's a time-travelling poem back to that cave. Fisher of cave, be in light, shade, starve, thirst, slip, between worlds, tides are time's erasure. Before the flood, the sun and moon commingled in eclipse of heat and blood. Dance into flames that lick this chamber, fall into fathoms before you wake. Kneel to the lowering of the body in a hollow of rock. Shadows, faces eclipsed. Cover him in sacred ochre with charms for a dead chieftain. Shells of nerite and periwinkle, wands of ivory. A pendant cone of tusk bone. Flint tools roughly serrated. Torches taper, black smoke rings, dark. Now is ghost blue light. Place it all back. Scatter in these rock beds a wreck of antlers, speckled bones and gnarled out teeth from time. Scatter in these rock beds a wreck of antlers, speckled bones and gnarled out teeth from time's migrations, once hoarded, then taken. Hyenas, bears, rhinoceros, herds of bison and elk, recover the lost skulls of mammoth and the red man. Assemble his half skeleton, cover once more with ochre. Through museum's glass with polished frame felt, blindly see these shapes shudder through fire and ice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's amazing. And thank you all so much for coming along. It's been a really fascinating discussion and inspiring to me, and I hope inspiring to other people as well, to use poetry wherever you find yourself, to express yourself and share with others. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will be back with another programme soon. I have some more amazing guests planned and lined up for the next instalment. I'm hoping in the next show to focus on the interplay between poetry and other art forms such as drama, visual art, perhaps dance. So if you're involved in those areas, please give me a shout because we'd love to hear from you. So do join us next time. Thank you.